We are now more than 600 days into Russia's war on Ukraine. Ukraine's spring counteroffensive has achieved minor territorial gains while Russia continues to bombard Ukrainian cities and blockade its ports. Meanwhile, just today, the European Commission has recommended that formal EU membership negotiations should begin with Ukraine, bringing some hope that the deadlock in the war may change. But with a war in the Middle East, President Zelensky rallies to keep up attention for Ukraine.
We'll try to show the result this year. And for us, it's very important because we lose people each day. Of course, it's difficult when you have now the war on the Middle East and nobody knows when it will finish and nobody knows the result of this tragedy.
I'm joined by Ukrainian Ambassador to Canada, Yuliya Kovaliv. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I wanted to talk to you about morale. You know, we are 600 days into this conflict. The top general of your country just said recently there is no beautiful breakthrough imminent and that there is really an issue with declining morale in the country. Where does this war stand right now?
You know that since the very first day of Russian invasion, Ukrainians showed enormous courage and dedication to protect the country. And this courage is with us. If you look on the pulse in Ukraine, Ukrainians, despite all the horror of the war, despite all the children, women, men, lives lost on this war, majority of Ukrainians, the high majority of Ukrainians are not ready to compromise. And why we are saying that and what is that? This is the core spirit of Ukrainians, because we saw the ceasefire in 2014-15 Minsk agreement. Unfortunately, we know that Russia will use this time to regroup, to produce more weapons. And if you ask Ukrainians what their motivation to fight the war, they will say you the answer, because we don't want our children to fight another war. We are ready to sacrifice our lives, and we are ready to protect actually the eastern NATO flank. But the only thing we need is the military support. And of course, with the war in the Middle East, it's not about the attention. It's just we are very pragmatical now, understanding that the achievements on the battlefield is also linked to the steady supply of the artillery, of the armored vehicles, of the additional air defense, now with the fighter jets. And of course, as there is a more demand for the weapons, for the artillery, it's the issue that we call and we advocate with all our partners to address, because the production in defense sector need to be ramped up.
There was a recent report that U.S. and European officials have quietly begun talking to the Ukrainian government about a possible peace negotiation. Is that true? Is that something that Ukraine is open to? Is there some sort of negotiated end to this?
No negotiations. And as I've said to you, and I think, and the President said very openly and directly, Ukrainian have the scope, and actually Ukraine presented the scope, which is the peace formula of President Zelensky. And there is an important point there. The restoration of territorial integrity, sovereignty of Ukraine. Russian troops need to get out of Ukrainian territory. All prisoners of war need to be released. Russia needs to pay all the damages. All Ukrainian children, over 19,000 of Ukrainian children illegally adopted, and probably many of the people saw the horrifying testimony of Ukrainian children who went through illegal abduction in Russia, in the parliament, in the House of Commons this week. This is what we are fighting for. This is for the prerequisite for the peace.
So this can only end on the battlefield?
Yeah.
Speaking of the battlefield, there is concern because the United States has essentially shut off funding. I think John Kirby, a spokesperson for the president, said today nearly 96% of U.S. funds so far have been used by Ukraine. And of course, there's not really an imminent bill in the U.S. Congress to renew that funding. Is there a concern that you run out of money from foreign partners? And what about equipment? What more do you need? And how are you being hampered by not having access to cash?
There are two paths on helping us to defend ourselves. First of all, let's be also clear that support of Ukraine is the investment of the NATO security. And I think the more we realize and hear and Russian patterns, not only was there illegal invasion in Ukraine, but we also saw Hamas delegation coming to Moscow, which I think is a very clear signal for everybody to watch. And of course, we rely on the support of our partners, both US, Canada, EU, but also in ourselves. Ukraine start investments and joint ventures with the major defense companies from the world to produce and to start the production of the weapon systems in Ukraine. That's also important to build the stability inside the country for the military support and to be able also to produce ourselves. And this will start with one of the biggest defense company, Rheinmetall, and the agreement has already been signed. There are many more, not many of them are public, but Ukraine is now also significantly investing our own resources to be able to partly but supply our own produced weapons. But of course, we still need the support.
You mentioned Hamas going to Russia and what that tells us about the regime in Moscow, but is there a concern coming from your country and the people that lead it that the war in the Middle East right now is overshadowing your conflict and what you need from Western partners to win?
I think what's really, we need all to be scared, that the horrific pictures of killing innocent women, children, innocent youth can't become a normality in this world. Russia started that in Ukraine, in Bucha, in Irpin, and it's now a cancer. It's spreading the world. And I think what we need to realize that impunity for these crimes will create another crimes. So that's why winning this war and bringing Russia to justice, it's so much important for preventing this kind of the crimes. And that I think the core we all need to care.
Ukraine's path to membership in the European Union is looking more likely. We heard from Ursula von der Leyen, who's the Commissioner of the European Union today. She said that completing our union is the call of history. How could the EU membership alter this dynamic? How could that help with the fight?
Of course, like this, I think this is a very important signal. The country who was in the middle of the war, the biggest war on the European continent since the Second World War, despite the war, is not only fighting the war, is not only helping the economy to survive, but also is committing and implementing a huge number of institutional changes and reforms. For us as a democratic country, high majority of Ukrainians support EU integration. That was the major call for people back in 2013 when young Ukrainian generation went to protest against pro-Russian president. And this was what is driving the country. And actually, this is one of the biggest threats for Putin, because successful Ukraine being an EU and NATO member, it's a really huge challenge to Putin himself and his regime. And that is also important for Ukraine. And I think it's also very important to all of our partners understanding that Ukraine is working on so many different fronts, both fighting the war and being able to provide those crucial reforms, including the judicial system, including the rule of law, despite the war. So I think it's if you started your question was the comment on morale. This is, I think, the brightest demonstration of morale of Ukrainian people. We are working each and every on different fronts, but every part of this is to support Ukraine's victory.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Yuliya Kovaliv, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us the latest from Ukraine. We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.